Hi there, welcome back to my channel, Our Gifted Garden. My name is Regina, and in this video we are going to do a tour of the entire garden. It is the very end of May. As I'm recording this, it is May 30th, and so much has changed in the garden since the last tour. Y'all, that month, from mid-April until now, that month and a half has been wild. Like, my garden looks totally different because everything has taken off. We've had a relatively cool spring for the area. I am growing in North Texas, Zone 8A, and we've had a decent amount of rain. Not too much, but we've had a good amount of rain. And so my plants have loved it. And so they are thriving, and I want to give you guys a look to see what's going on. But before we get into that tour, go ahead and click that like button. I'm sure you're going to like it. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more gardening content from me here in North Texas. Of course, if you're in this area, then it will definitely apply. But even if you're not, there are lots of tips that you can take to use in your garden no matter where you are. And of course, if you know any other gardeners who would benefit from this content, please share it with them. Those are the fast and easy ways that you can help support the channel. All right, so now let's get into it. Okay, so the first bed that we're going to be looking at is the one that's right behind me. It is the southernmost bed in my yard. I do try to plan out my garden such that the things that are going to be the tallest are on the north side and the shorter things are on the south side. It's not an exact science. I mean, here in Texas, in the summer, the sun is so high in the sky, to be honest, even if something's shaded at one point, it'll be unshaded at another if it's not, completely covered. So it's not that big of a deal, but I do try to keep that in mind. And depending on where you live, it might be a bigger issue than others. So something to keep in mind when you're planting your garden as well. So in this southernmost bed are my Determinate tomatoes. So I have mostly Romas, but I do have a few other types. I have a terracotta, I think I have an early doll, an early treat, and a few other varieties, but mostly Roma because those have been really great producers for me. I love using them to make paste, sometimes sauce, to use throughout the season. I'll make paste out of those and freeze it, and so I can use it to make sauce later on, or I can use it to make chili. Anything where I need tomato, I have it in my freezer because I use from the Romas that I grow in the summer. So let's take a look. I have not trellised these at all. They need pruning. They need a lot. This is a wild bed that I'm hoping to get to in the next day or so, but I try not to stress myself out too much, to be honest. I have a pretty big garden, and I have a lot of things to do in the garden and inside, so I just try to go little by little and not beat myself up when I can't do everything, because it is humanly impossible to do all the things we want to do, but that doesn't mean we can't go for things, right? So let's take a look at these Determinate tomatoes. Okay, so here is this bed of Determinate tomatoes. It's an 8x4 bed, and you can't tell where one plant stops and the other one starts because they have just grown so wild. So I also, out here for my tour, my daughter Rhea wanted to say hello and help out. Rhea, you gonna say hi? She's 6 and she helps me out in the garden sometimes. And you guys can probably hear it is currently thundering. That's loud. There's been a little bit of lightning, but I've just been kind of counting to see how far away the lightning is. If it gets bad, we'll go in, but for now, it's far enough away that we're okay. And the garden will love the rain, so I'm kind of excited. So I do have some tomatoes. You can kind of see a Roma right there. Rhea, can you point to it? See that Roma tomato right there. Also growing in this bed, I do have, here's a marigold that I planted here. They always bloom out so pretty and get so big. I love just kind of seeing them in the garden. And I think I have another one over there on the side as well. But otherwise, lots of tomatoes, more Romas in there. They are starting to grow. This will be so fun once these plants start producing. So now on to the next bed. Okay, so in this bed, we have a lot going on. I often do my Indeterminate tomatoes in the past. I've done those all in one bed together using stakes. This year I wanted to try out a string trellis, and I also decided to put them on multiple beds. So I have 3 different beds where I have Indeterminate tomatoes growing just on the side. And so far it's going really well. I like it. I think it's going to be, oh, that thunder's loud. I think it's going to be really nice to just, it's going to be a lot easier to access the tomatoes on these plants rather than having a whole bed of them where I got to squeeze in there. And it's also a lot easier to prune because they're all on the edge. So here I have, on this 8-foot side of this bed, I have 7 plants growing. So these have a little bit more than 1 square foot. And also in this bed, along with these tomatoes, and I will do a video to show you guys more in detail of this tomato trellis, but it's just 3 2x2s, some metal brackets, and these little spool thread things that I purchased to go on them. And those are, the threads are secured with zip ties. So I did it as easy as possible. Alright, so other than these indeterminate tomatoes, you okay? Okay. Do you want to come be in the video? Or no? You done? Or you want to take a break? Okay. So other than these indeterminate tomatoes in this bed, I also have lots of peppers and I have eggplant. So my hot peppers, I put those in the front. So pepper plants here. These were being crowded by the tomatoes before I got them under control. So now they're starting to kind of take off a bit. But yeah, lots of pepper plants in here. I do my pepper plants with about 1 square foot spacing so I can get a lot more in there. And so far, it has worked well for me, so I'm going to keep doing it that way. As they get big, they do start to get very full, but it's never been an impact on production. I do feed, you know, I'll feed them well to make sure that there's nutrition in the soil. Some more peppers. I do have some peppers coming on here, actually. I'll probably harvest these. These are a banana pepper type. And then back here I have eggplant. My eggplant always grow huge. Look at that, it's a little mini grasshopper. It's kind of sad, I don't want to kill baby, but I'm totally going to get my gloves and take care of that thing because they get huge and they eat my plants. And when they're huge, I'm too scared to touch them. And my husband has to do it. But yeah, I have a few different eggplant plants in here as well that look amazing. So the eggplants are blooming. And they look great as well. Now let me show you guys this bed from the other side. Oh, also, just didn't mention, this is lemongrass. This actually isn't just a weed, so I have plenty of them, but this is actually lemongrass that I planted here and here. I started this from seed when I started my peppers and tomatoes, and it has grown beautifully, so I'm really excited to have that for cooking. Lemongrass is used in a lot of Asian cooking, and I absolutely love cooking Asian food, and it's one of those things that I never have when I'm looking through ingredients, so I'm kind of excited to have it now. Okay, so here are those tomato plants from the other side. So you can kind of see how they are. Now I do have this one, the leaves are curling on me and I'm not sure why. So I'm just gonna hope for the best. I might prune off a couple of these branches, but I'm not sure what the issue is. And there's a little bit of curling on this one too. So I'm not 100% sure, so I'll keep you guys posted, but a lot of times I've found that these little problems kind of resolve themselves, so we're going to hope that that's the case, because otherwise the plants look really good. Okay, so the next bed on our tour is the only bed in my garden that is a 5-foot by 8-foot bed. I don't recommend it, it's too wide. I can't reach it. Can't reach the middle of it very well. I have to kind of climb in sometimes, which is not ideal. So I don't recommend making your raised beds wider than 4 feet. But anyway, in this bed I have tomatoes growing. Behind me, here's one side of the trellis. I have 5 tomato plants here in this 5 feet on the edge of this bed. And then also in this bed I have tomatillos. I love growing tomatillos, and last year I tried them in containers because when the first year I grew them, they took up so much space in the raised bed. I wanted to see if I could put them in containers and use that space for something else. Well, it was a big fat failure last year. I didn't get any tomatillos because I just could not keep those containers watered enough. It was such a hot summer. It got hot so early. I just was not able to keep up with them. And so they grew, but like they never really ended up producing any fruit. I think the plants were just always in duress. So that was the issue with those. And same thing with my ground cherries. I have ground cherries in this bed as well, which are, you know, related to tomatillos, but they're sweet and delicious. If you've never grown ground cherries before and you want something that's more, you know, fruit-like sweet in your garden, definitely grow ground cherries. My kids, well, 2 out of 3 of my kids love them. The other one is, you know, a little on the fence. They taste kind of almost like a caramelly, appley flavor. I don't know. They're delicious. And so I'm growing ground cherries as well in this bed, and they tend to sprawl too. Containers just did not work for me. That doesn't mean they can't work for you, but they did not work for me in our climate, and so I have those in this raised bed too. Also in this raised bed, I am growing lavender, a perennial lavender plant that has been here since 2020. That's when I started that one from seed, and it's been doing well. I have some thyme in this bed that's also been here since 2020. And then also I planted rosemary in this raised bed too, and it is doing good so far. I started it this year. I have yet to get rosemary to get big enough and grow well enough during the growing season that it'll survive the winter. So I'm hoping this is the year so I can have a nice perennial rosemary bush to go on, you know, forever. So those are the main things that are growing in this bed. Also in this bed I do have some basil that I've put in here, some marigolds. I think the basil I have is like lemon basil in this bed, some marigolds, and then also Italian parsley. I use a lot of Italian parsley in my cooking, so whenever I can have it growing in the garden during the spring summer season, I always have some going. So next up on the tour we have these 3 containers where 2 of them I'm using to grow some dwarf tomatoes. I'm trying out dwarf varieties of tomatoes this year. I'm growing 2 types, Tasmanian chocolate, and then the other one is Dwarf King. I can't remember what I have in the containers versus what I have in one of the raised beds, but those are the 2 varieties that I'm growing this year. I just want to see how they do and, you know, just how these tiny tomato plants grow and see if there's something I would want to have in the garden more often, because right now they're growing at about the same size as the pepper plants, and that could be really cool to have tomatoes that don't get much bigger than a pepper plant. I mean, my pepper plants get huge, but they're nothing compared to the size of the tomato that the tomato plants usually get. That could really mean something in like saving space and getting to plant more things in my garden because my space is quite limited. Also in a container I have this sage. This sage I planted, I want to say last year, and it survived the winter. I also have a little bit of thyme in here. It survived the winter. It's still going, so it's still going. I'm happy. I don't use a ton of sage. I need to look up recipes to find out ways to use sage. The only thing I can think of is like Thanksgiving dressing. But there have got to be other things that sage is good for. So if you have any ideas, you can put them in the comments below. But I still like growing it either way. I love the smell of it, and it's really nice to have in the garden. Okay, next up on our tour is the only 4x12 bed in my garden, and this one is where I had my strawberries last year. However, I pulled most of them up and then planted my onions in this bed, and I just harvested those a couple days ago. I do have a video on that coming soon for y'all. And now it is overrun, and it was while the onions were here too. It became overrun with grass and weeds, so I really had to clean this one out really good. I have a couple of strawberry plants still in here, but they're like overrun with grass. My plan is to clean out this bed, and then this will be the bed I use for fall this season. Okay, so this bed right here next to me is another bed that has indeterminate tomatoes. I have another trellis here, so it's my 3rd and last one in the garden where I'm growing some indeterminates and using the string method. All the trellises that I've built for these indeterminate tomatoes are the same. I did build them all myself. I'm only a little bit handy. I'm not carpenter handy, but I can, like, you know, put boxes together, and that's essentially what these are. So I did build them all by myself. I got my ladder, my drill, my little post pounder thing. And so I have indeterminate tomatoes on the edge I do have some curling leaves, as you can see, on some of these tomatoes, but I actually researched it in between recording for the last bed and this one, that it's probably just due to excessive pruning, because recently, especially the ones in that other bed that are really curled, I hadn't pruned them very much at all. And so when I tied them up a couple days ago, I finally finished tying everything up, I pruned off a lot of those plants because they had tons of suckers that had gotten really big. So that's probably why the leaves are curling. They'll recover after a while because I don't see any signs of disease. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, that excessive pruning I did all at once. So it is important to stay on top of pruning so you're not having to do a whole bunch at once, because the plants don't always like that very much. But anyway, back to this bed. So in this bed I also have eggplant growing. I'm growing a few different varieties of eggplant. I showed you the eggplant in the other bed. I believe over there I have like white knight and green knight and maybe some black beauty. And in this bed I believe these are Rosita, but I could be wrong. I can't remember what I put where. And then also in this bed I have peppers. I have orangey sweet peppers. I believe I have Cubanelles in this bed. And I have a couple of marigolds. And then I also have my other two dwarf tomato plants are in this bed. So here you can see how the size they are in comparison to pepper plants. So these might be a really good opportunity for you guys who are growing in very small areas, maybe on patios, and you want to grow tomatoes. The dwarf tomatoes might be really good. I haven't tried the fruit yet. They haven't produced. They are starting to get a few blooms, but they haven't produced yet. So I can't make a full recommendation yet. We'll see how they do. But if and when they do, I'll let you guys know, because they can be a great option to grow tomatoes in a small area. And then also in this bed you can see I have garlic, and it is coming out. I was gonna harvest it today, but I probably won't get to it until tomorrow. But I'm gonna get that garlic out and hang it on the drying rack where I have my onions drying in the garage right now. So next two beds, y'all. Sorry, you can probably hear the air conditioner going. But it's actually surprisingly really nice out here. It's been overcast. There's been a little rain off and on. I've had to stop my recording, restart it. But it feels amazing out right now. But anyways, so behind me we have two beds of field peas. Look at these field peas. They look amazing. If you are not from the South or you don't know what field peas are, think black-eyed peas. Black-eyed peas are a type of field peas, or also known as cow peas. I am not growing black-eyed peas. I'm growing different varieties because I like pretty much all the other varieties better than I like black-eyed peas. The taste, the texture, etc. I love them so much, and they're hard to find in the store fresh. At least I don't ever see them in the grocery store fresh. Sometimes you can find them frozen. I might have to travel out to East Texas if I wanted some. So they're really important to me because I eat them growing up when I would visit Alabama. And so yeah, so now I have them growing in my garden. They're something I grow every year. And they're crazy easy to grow. You just direct sow the seeds and let them grow. They love the heat, they love the sun, they can take it, and they don't need a ton of water. So field peas, I have them in two beds. Last year, these two beds, in one of them I had my Determinate tomatoes, and in the other one I had my peppers. And so this year, I'm using them for those peas. And I use a soil inoculant to help the peas produce their own nitrogen. You know, it's what legumes can do, which means that they're not going to require much fertilizer from me. I also always top my beds with a little compost before I plant for the next season. So these are good to go. I won't have to fertilize them or anything, just water when they need it, and they're going to be good. Now, as you can see in this other bed where I have the peas growing, I also have my arched trellis. This trellis I made out of two 8-foot cattle panels. Not last year, but the year before. I've grown watermelon on this trellis. Last year I grew Armenian cucumbers. It is a really strong trellis, and it's just held together by zip ties in the middle. I did have to replace a couple of them last year because they kind of gave out, which, you know, they're zip ties. They're not huge and incredibly strong, but it's so worthwhile because that was just a really easy way to tie them together, and I'm fine with replacing a zip tie here and there over the years. So if you've wanted to use a cattle panel to make an arch trellis and you have not been able to because they are so big and long and hard to fit in a car, just get the two 8-foot ones instead of a large 16-foot. Because as you can see, it works just as well. Now on this trellis, I have pole beans growing on it. on both sides, and then I also have cucumbers. A few different varieties of cucumbers. One of them is the Armenian cucumber because they grew so well for me last year. They were able to take the heat. They didn't have any issues with disease. I got cucumbers, so many cucumbers. I think I still have a few in my freezer because I freeze them and I use them in smoothies when I have so many. I even juiced cucumbers. Like, it was wonderful to finally have cucumbers all season, because in the past I've had issues with disease and cucumber beetles and things like that, and the Armenian cucumbers were able to stand up to any of that. Okay, and so the last bed in this row is my okra bed. I actually grew okra in this bed last year, and it did really well. Just because of the height of okra, I just decided to leave it where it was. Next year I'll probably put it somewhere else. But this year I'm growing okra in this bed again alongside this trellis. It has been a lot of work getting everything tied up on the trellis so it doesn't overtake the okra plants, and that's probably going to be an ongoing thing this season, is keeping those cucumbers and pole beans on the trellis and not have them take over the okra. But the okra is doing amazingly. I direct sowed it. I'm pretty sure on my last garden tour the plants had just barely sprouted. They were still really small. Now they are doing well. Take a look. They have, some of them are starting to bloom, or you have little flower buds. So I'm gonna have okra very, very soon, and the okra will grow most likely as tall as my house, or taller during, well, tall is the shorter part of my house, or taller, and produce all the way through up until it starts cooling off in October. At least that's what it's done most seasons. Now, another thing you probably notice as you're looking at these beds of field peas and also of okra is that I have herbs growing. You'll see basil. I have Thai basil growing in these beds, purple basil, shiso, which is an Asian herb that I grew last year. A friend gave me 2 plants of shiso, and one of them I had in one of my raised beds in a really sunny area, and it grew like crazy, and then it set seed, and there are little shiso plants everywhere now. So I just transplanted a couple of those. So I have shiso growing in these beds. I have Genovese basil, purple basil, all kinds of herbs and things growing in these beds as well, because I like to squeeze my herbs in wherever I can. I don't really allot space specifically for herbs. I just kind of squeeze them in. So I start the seeds when I start everything else, and then I just squeeze the plants in wherever I can fit them, and that has worked out for me. So now we're going to take a look at the raised beds that are along my back fence here. I made these beds out of fencing material when I had my fence. My fence actually used to end, for my backyard, used to end actually pretty much right where I'm standing. It went across this way, and that was the end of my backyard, and then the rest of the area over here was side yard. So we extended the backyard, and so they took down that piece of fence and then built new fence all the way around. And so that extra piece of fence we still had, and so I used that, took it apart, and I built these raised beds last season so that I could grow things along the fence. And so that's what I'm doing with them. I have cucumber growing in this one. You can see the cucumber starting to climb. Last year I just used them for pole beans and yard-long beans, but I wanted to see if this type of trellis with the wire and then the string would be able to hold like cucumber plants. So I do have cucumbers growing here, and so far they're doing well. I actually had the plants planted and they started growing before I finished retying the strings, because I left the wire and everything from last season, but I cut the strings to get the old plants out. It was just faster. And so retying the strings kind of took me a minute, so I just didn't get to it before the plants got kind of big. So I recently tied these up like last week, got them all tied up. And so now they're starting to do better on this trellis. But I think it'll hold them. We'll see how heavy it is once it has fruit, but hopefully it's strong enough to hold cucumbers. Then that's another place I can grow cucumbers in my garden. And so then I also have one here with, these are yard-long beans growing in this one. They haven't started producing fruit yet, but they have been growing well. I had some issues with like the wood lice or roly-polies, like tons of them in the beds. I know that they can help with like breaking stuff down, but there were a lot of them, and they were killing my young plants, particularly my green beans, because, you know, I direct sow those. And so I planted more because some of them got eaten. That's why this bed isn't quite as full. It's not as overplanted as like I do with some things. Because the same thing happened with my green beans and my cucumbers that are on my arch trellis, but I went back and added more seeds. I was out of seeds for the yard-long beans, so I couldn't add more of those. But I went back and added more seeds, and now the trellis is overflowing, as you saw. So that's why this one isn't quite as full, but the plants have now started getting some momentum now that it's gotten warmer, and I think they're going to do well. They tend to be very productive, and they love the heat. And then next up we have these are actually bush beans. They're called Big Kahuna. I didn't pay attention when I bought the seeds. I just bought those when I was at the store one day. I saw them, they looked interesting. And I didn't realize they were bush beans, or I could have put them somewhere else. But they have produced, and as you can see, there are beans here now that I need to come out with my pruners to get. But they're doing well. I need to get some neem oil maybe, because it looks like there's some spider mites on these leaves. My bush beans always get spider mites. I don't know what the deal is. But I think I'm going to try to take care of it. Usually I just ignore it and then eventually pull the plants out. But I might try to take care of it for these because they are giving me plenty of beans. And then lastly we have the pole beans. These are doing great. I've already started getting some beans. You can see I have a couple growing in here. And I'm sure they're going to produce many, many more. We love green beans. Well, I do and my husband does. And I'd say 1 out of 3 kids eats them voluntarily, but all 3 of them do eat them. And so I like to grow plenty of them because that's something that we have, you know, with meals a lot. So my camera started overheating, so I had to take it inside, let it cool off for a bit while the camera was cooling off, which is weird because it's not even hot out here, but whatever, camera. The camera was cooling off. I went ahead and harvested green beans, the ones that we saw when I was showing you those plants. Some of these are from the pole bean plant, and then most of them were from the bush beans. And then I also went ahead and harvested these 2 peppers that I saw in my pepper bed, one of my pepper beds. Now, the weird thing is, these do not look like the cubanelles that I grow. These are a type of banana pepper. But what's weird is the only banana peppers I think I'm growing are cubanelles and Marconi. And I looked at my label, my plant label thing, because it hasn't rubbed off yet. They always rub off eventually, but it hasn't rubbed off yet, and it says jalapeno. This is obviously not a jalapeno, so either I messed up the plant or it was mislabeled. The seed packet was mislabeled. I am going to go towards saying the seed packet was mislabeled, and the reason why is because I know I did not buy seeds for some other type of banana pepper, and I specifically bought seeds for jalapenos this year because last year my jalapeno seeds didn't sprout, so I ended up just buying a seedling for jalapenos, and it didn't grow that well in my garden compared to my other ones. And so I purposefully bought jalapeno seeds at a store. I don't even remember where I got them from, but not a jalapeno. I haven't tasted it yet, but I know what jalapenos look like, and this ain't it. So there's that. So I guess I'm not going to have jalapenos this year because I believe I only had 1 plant in my garden, because hot peppers I usually just do 1 plant of each because I can only do so much with hot peppers. So I'm a little bit annoyed, honestly. We'll see if maybe I just mixed it up, but this doesn't look like anything that I had seeds for, so thumbs down. It's not the first time it's happened. It won't be the last. It is what it is. The peppers look delicious though, so I'll still eat them, but it's not a jalapeno. Moving on. All right, so now we're going to take a look at the last main area of my garden. This area is actually the area that would not have been part of my garden had we not moved the fence. So I was just really excited to get that done. So glad that my husband agreed to do that because it just gave me much more space. The side yard here wasn't really doing me any good as a part of the front yard, and I didn't want to put my garden in the front yard. At least in my neighborhood, it's not really done. And so I felt like it would be maybe a little gauche to do something that not other people are doing. I didn't know if my neighbors would really appreciate that. And not to mention, I didn't want to grow things like fruits and stuff out. I mean, I have 2 pear trees in the front, but I didn't want to grow a whole bunch of fruits like blackberries, things like that in the front yard where more pests and animals would see them to attract those to the area as well. So that was why I wasn't really willing to garden this area in this way. I mean, obviously flowers would be fine, but for fruits and things like that, unless it was behind my backyard fence. So in this area, I have 1 raised bed. It's a 12 by 12 by 12. It's a keyhole bed. So it's 12 inches on each side and then 8 by 4 cut out in the middle so that I'm able to reach everything. And it's where I have most of my perennials in this area. So starting out in containers, I have my blueberries. I currently have 5 blueberry plants. I had 6, but one of them died last year when I tried to treat the ants in the bed with orange oil, and it did kill the ants, but it also killed the plant. So oops, joke's on me. So I am growing my blueberries in containers just because of the soil requirements. They require acidic soil. I should probably get some sort of way to test the pH, but I use like the soil acidifier every so often, and then I also use a fertilizer for them that is, I think I use Hollytone, but it's made for more acidic, acid-loving plants. So that's why I keep them in a container. I think eventually if I had the space, I could do like a raised bed specifically for them, and I would just have to make sure that that soil stayed acidic. Now, as you can see, I've got lots of blueberries growing. Not a ton, but lots, I think. And as the plants grow bigger and stronger, then they're gonna produce more and more. So I'm excited to have a nice little harvest this year once these guys are ready. Now there have been a few that have gotten ready that I've eaten, a couple of the Titans and a couple of the powder blues, and they've been so delicious. You guys, if you've never grown blueberries and you think that you don't really like blueberries, grow some blueberries. The flavor is so different and it's just so much better than what you can buy in the store. Next up, we have the muscadines. Y'all, the muscadines are the star of this garden area, in my opinion. So I grow muscadines. I grew up eating them. Sorry, if you've seen my garden tours before, you've probably heard some of these stories. But I grew up eating them. Summers in Alabama, and we called them bullets, and we found them wild. But I just really, once I found out that they grew really well here, better than some of the other grapes because they're not as disease prone. And this is my 3rd year with these plants and I haven't had any disease issues, but they are blooming out. Take a look. I have so many blooms on these plants. Last year, only one of them gave me fruit last year. Last year only one of them gave me fruit. This year, they're both loaded with flower buds. Some of those buds have opened, and then I have a few of these little mini grapes that are starting to come in. Now these grapes won't be ready until around Labor Day, so they have the whole summer to grow, but last year they did really well, and I'm hoping the same happens this year. But the plants are gorgeous. They're looking amazing, and I just cannot wait to have this fruit because it is the sweetest, most delicious. I don't know how to describe it. If you've never had a muscadine, then you need to go get one. If you live in the South, grow them. It's really easy. So my trellis here was made out of 2 8-foot cattle panels. Once again, this time they're not arched. I just have them on these, I want to say these are 8-foot U-posts or T-posts. I can't remember what they're called when they don't have the holes in them. And they're attached with zip ties. That simple. Last year, one of them started falling down a little bit, so I had to add some more zip ties. But otherwise, they have done really, really good. And it wasn't really hard to make this trellis. My husband helped me with some of it just because I couldn't hold the panel and attach it. But otherwise, I made and planned this out myself, and it's doing great. So now here in this raised bed, this last raised bed, I have, first off, my garlic that is ready to come out. I was planning to get it harvested today, move that to tomorrow's list. So I have the garlic here. As you can see, it is starting to fall over, and half of the leaves about are brown, which means it's ready. So I'm going to get this out of the ground and get it on the drying rack with my onions along with the garlic that was in that other bed. This is the rest of it. I planted this garlic back in October. Yes, back in October. I did do a video on that, so check it out if you're interested. I recommend you grow garlic. I don't know exactly how long it takes in other climates, but down here, you literally plant it and you almost forget about it. Like, you can give it a little water and stuff, but it's just gonna grow. And it is literally the easiest thing. It's easier than onions, because onions you have to, well, with the onions I started from seed indoors, and then I have to transplant them. They're not hard, but garlic is even easier because you literally plant it out in the garden and just let it grow over the winter. It overwinters. It has to overwinter in order for the bulbs to be properly striated. I think that's the word. I could be wrong. But it has to overwinter. But you do all of that in the garden. You just plant it, and then you're good. So I'm excited to get all of that harvested and drying along with the onions. And then otherwise in this bed we have lots of volunteer basil, volunteer shiso, and then you can see my raspberry plant. One of my raspberry plants, I planted two. One of them did okay, but it kind of struggled a bit last year. And then this one that's growing really, really well now, it struggled a bit too. And then I cut it back, and now it is putting out a whole bunch of leaves. It is a primocane fruiting raspberry, so I might get some this season. I got like 2 or 3 berries last year, so maybe it'll really do something this year. And then here you can see my blackberries. These are Primark Freedom, so they're primocane fruiting, they're thornless, they're semi-erect. I just pruned them back like just a couple days ago. I still have some of the branches still on the ground I have to clean up. I have harvested 15 pounds of blackberries this season from these plants, and so most of them had already, I had already harvested, so I went ahead and pruned back all those floricanes because that's what have produced for me already, because they're not going to produce again. And also just to clean up the plant, cut it back. Some of them have gotten too tall. It needed a good pruning. So I've done that, and now it's going to continue to grow. That'll promote more growth of those lateral branches, which is where the fruit ends up at the end of the lateral branches. So, so yeah, I'll be getting blackberries through some of the summer. Once it gets hot, it'll stop flowering, but then in the fall, I'll get a nice crop on those primocane branches, and then again in the spring. So I started this blackberry patch area, and I'll put in a little image or a video of what it looked like before I pruned it. But this was 4 plants, just 4 plants I got, not last season, but the season before. And I just planted them in this bed last season. First I had them in containers. They didn't do very well, so I put them in this raised bed once I built it. And they are doing amazing. They have spread, they're sending up shoots, and so I'm just going to let them take over because the berries are delicious and they're so productive. So if you're considering blackberries, do it because they are a fruit that I found is worthwhile. And then the rest of this bed, I have my fruit trees. I have 2 cherry trees here on the end, and then 2 peach trees in the middle, and then 2 plum trees, and 2 apple trees. My plan is to prune these guys back and keep them small and get them to the shape I want. I'm gonna let them grow this summer, and then this winter I'm gonna prune them back to kind of get the shape I want, and then over the next season, then I'll prune them more during the growing season to kind of minimize the growth of them so that they kind of stay a certain size so that I can access the fruit. I want to be able to reach all the fruit without a ladder, and I want to have like a reasonable amount of fruit from each pair of trees rather than a whole bunch of one type of fruit all at once. That's the point of growing multiple trees rather than just like 1 or 2 in this area. Now the reason why I have 2 of each, because I have pollinator varieties for each other. So a lot of the stone fruits do require pollinators, and also the apples as well. So I researched and chose trees that would grow well in my area that would get the right amount of chill hours. And we did have a rather warm winter, so that might be why I didn't get a ton of fruit on them. They just may not have gotten what they needed. But I did choose fruit trees that were specifically selected for my area, and then I made sure that I had 2 varieties that would be good pollinators for each other, which is what I recommend if you're considering putting in fruit trees. And I all of my trees I purchased online and ordered them and had them shipped to me. Now a lot of them were from stores that are, or like a couple of them I got from Leg Creek Farms, which is in East Texas, so it's not that far from me. And then I think 1 of them or 2 of them came from like Isons or Stark Brothers, I can't remember. When I couldn't find the pollination pair that I needed, then I looked in other places. And then of course the last thing I'm going to show you guys are my nectarine trees. As you can see, they're kind of overgrown. We've got branches coming out of the rootstock. It's a whole mess. My fruit trees are kind of a mess right now. I haven't been able to give them the time that they need to like prune things, etc. I will get to it eventually though. But these nectarine trees, they look amazing. I did not get fruit on them. I didn't get really fruit on any of my fruit trees this year. I barely had blooms. So I really do think it was like just how warm our winter was, and maybe they just didn't get the chill that they needed. But that's okay. You know what? I got a bumper crop of blackberries. so far already. I already made a blackberry pie. I'll give you guys a picture of that too. It is delicious, still in my fridge. We haven't eaten it all yet because I just made it a couple days ago. But, you know, that's how the garden is too. Some things will do well some years, some things won't, and that's just how it is. But it's just about kind of keeping it going, understand that things go in cycles, and eventually you'll reap what you have sown. So that brings us to the end of this tour. Thank you for sticking around. Of course, like, subscribe, and until we meet again, have a great one. Bye.